Okay. I just started recording. I guess I had a bunch of questions for you. I don't know which one to start with, but you were talking about movement as medicine last time, and I've been considering just whether or not my injury needs to do anything to it, or if I just need to exercise adequately enough so I can get better and not have to go through any surgical process. But what's been your experience with just exercise being a helpful tool for that?
Yeah, I think each injury is unique. I wouldn't want to put one blanket statement for all injuries. But from my experience, I had generally not very flexible. So something I can work on, right? If I want to become more flexible, I'd have to do things to
Mm-hmm.
increase my flexibility. So I need to be more consistent with that. But I have in my right hip what's called femoral acetabular impingement, so FAI. And so that came from an old soccer injury that I developed in college. And I was getting really severe pain in my hip, like deep in my socket. It felt like there was
Mm-hmm.
barbed wire inside my hip. So finally, I just drew a line, made a doctor's appointment. He referred me to the orthopedic surgeon. She wanted to delay surgery as much as she could, she felt, but she said if he needed it, we can do it. So I waited a few weeks and then I was like, okay, I'm going to call the doctor and schedule this appointment because it's just so bad. The scheduler was out. She was on vacation. So I just left a message and I started preparing. I just started strength training and doing yoga to prepare for the surgery.
Mm-hmm.
The scheduler was on vacation and she never called me back. And within 5 to 6 weeks, my hip was feeling so much better after like just strength training and yoga and really taking care of my hip. And so in that situation, I don't know if I'll need hip surgery eventually, but I was able to delay it. That was actually 6 or 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, that prehab, like the preventative rehabilitation that I was getting ready for my hip was actually good enough to be like all the rehab I needed for that time. And I've been pretty active over those years too. So that was one story for me where it was really helpful. But
Mm-hmm.
that does just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody all the time. But I do think like moving and letting the body do what it's good at doing is a good way to go about it.
So you were like planning 100% to do the surgery. So did you just end up canceling it when you realized after those 5 weeks that it was fine?
Yeah. So ironically, I had left a message at the doctor's office with the scheduler, and they just never called me back. But I actually it was okay because I had been preparing and I like getting there. And actually, I was a blessing in disguise because I would have thought, okay, I don't need that surgery at that point
Yeah,
when I was feeling better. Yeah.
it's interesting. I think with my injury, I've been trying to just exercise for the past year or two, and I think it's a problem with me not doing the right exercises because at some point toward the beginning, I was trying to just get back into soccer, so I was doing a little bit of PT, but then trying to jog and increase my level of speed for jogging. It just didn't work because I just kept aggravating my hip and the joint in there. And then a year into it, after I going to the doctor and they said my back didn't have a problem, which I thought was causing it. And then going afterward to acupuncture and trying to also do chiropractor stuff. All of it, it just seemed like there was something really inside that I just couldn't fix with exercise. But then recently, with working with Nikki and Kevin, we tried something new where I was like doing more just abdominal work, which would support my back. And then I've just been like doing some cardio, like very light cardio for like longer periods of time. How did you like know which exercises, which yoga techniques to just choose off the bat to be able to heal like relatively quickly?
Yeah. So two just general large principles is like mobility, like the ability for a joint to move, and then stability, making that joint stable as well. I worked on both of those things. So mobility through yoga. And so yoga was just a general practice. It wasn't like a class designed just for my hip mobility, but I knew that was movements I typically wasn't doing. So that move made me get out of my comfort zone in that way. And then stability is just strengthening the muscles around that area. I was never really somebody who lifted weights before as a soccer player in my era. Like soccer players didn't really lift weights. I was like, why would I need to strengthen my legs? I'm on my feet running all the time. Hindsight, I wish I would have, because I think it would have prevented some injuries and maybe increased my performance too. But doing that for my hip, at least, was helpful to increase that range of motion of that joint, because that impingement was forcing me to decrease my range of motion because I didn't want to move it. And then having some strength and stability around that joint. And what's the diagnosis of your injury, Rand?
I got an MRI recently, and they said that I have a possible labrum injury.
Yeah.
But it just runs down my leg. Feels it's unstable when I try to stand up. So,
yeah, one symptom you could be having some sciatica. That's the nerve that passes the back of your hip. And so that could be a symptom that you're having. And then the labrum is part of your cartilage that deepens the socket of that ball and socket joint in your hip. So those are things like each injury is going to be unique. And so it's important to have a healthcare provider to manage. But like you said, you're trying some new things with Kevin and Nikki, and they're working out really well. You don't want to downplay that.
Yeah. I think something else, like another component to being able to come back from injuries, but also I guess in general, just living a more fulfilling life, is being able to eat the right foods so that it can reduce inflammation, and just being able to feel there's energy throughout the day instead of overeating or not eating the right things and then feeling like I don't have the energy to do my homework or do things in life. Do you feel like you maintain a diet in any way? And has it changed through injuries or playing different sports in college?
Yeah, definitely more aware as I'm older, managing, don't have the metabolism like I used to. Where are you getting food is important, right? So we're here at a cafeteria. We have limited choices, whatever the cafeteria provides for lunch. Or you could bring your food. I've seen you bring some food in too.
Yeah.
At home, who's providing the food? Are you going out and buy food, or is it parents? Or in my case, it's often my wife. We kind of have this theory of it's just like fewer processed foods in general. And then we try to have just balanced food. There's lots of diets out there, and I don't think there's just one right diet. I think it might be one right diet for an individual. We have a little bit different body chemistries, blood chemistries. But yeah, I'm aware of that. I try to drink lots of water, try not to get empty calories through drinks, like sugary drinks. So just general principles of some variety, or lower, fewer processed foods. I think in my generation growing up, it was all about carbs. I think there's science to move away from that, and fewer carbs, especially simple carbohydrates. Adding some good proteins and those type of things. So, yeah.
When you're talking about playing soccer in college and then eventually getting injured, I'm curious as to what role playing sports has been in your life. And I feel like the transition between just simply doing exercise from actually being together with other people and playing a sport in the community and being able to actually try and aim for things in a sport, like what York was telling me the other day, and just how running has motivated him to improve all the other aspects of his life. Do you think that has changed like over the years? What are your thoughts just about playing sports for you and your own experience?
It changed personally or changed in different ways?
Like change in terms of how you approach your life with playing sports and without playing sports, and the intensity of when you are playing sports.
Yeah, I always knew that I love playing sports and games like all my life. And I've really found that I think just there's a really power to play. I love playing card games. I love playing board games. I love playing sports. So I think that my connection to that is just really important for enjoying life. I want to and do things that I enjoy. So that might not be everybody's thing. I have a chessboard here in my classroom, and there's extra time I love to play and compete with students or friends. And so I think there's something like that. Like you talked about community. Saturday mornings, I play soccer. That's when I play my soccer games, indoor soccer with a group of guys. And some of them I've known since I was in my early teens. So I played club soccer together. So again, that's all the physical benefits of exercise, but some of those social benefits of being connected with my friends. We're all playing at a level of like, I would say it's pretty good soccer still. It's over 40 league, but guys have played in college, and so we're connecting socially, but also just by the game connects us.
Yeah.
And then I think exercise and sports too is just, for me personally, just a great, I think exercise, like we talked about movement as medicine. I think exercise period there's a lot of studies like those neurochemicals in our body that all those good ones are released when we move. So if I start my day with exercise, whether it's a workout in the weight room or a run down in the canyon, typically I have a better day. So I think it's just really important to me to just continue that and find ways to continue that. I actually have a recent knee injury. It's kept me off the soccer field for the last few weeks. So I've really leaned into golf. So I'm helping with the high school golf team. And that's something competitive for me. It's social, it's physical. You don't get your heart rate up as much, but it's a mental challenge. Developing camaraderie with people I know and then people I don't know too. And I think that's another beauty of the game is like learning about other people. We host another team or I host another coach. And as I'm playing the game, we get to compete together and work together and learn about each other. So I think it's this medium that can provide so many good things. And so that's why I think about halfway through my career, about 20 years at Parker, and like, why did I choose this? And I think it's that power of play and exercise is why I'm here. I can promote that for other people and I can be around it myself. Yeah.
I see. When you talked about, I was actually thinking about how you've been playing soccer every Saturday morning. If you have the possibility of injury, and then you talked about this knee injury, how often does it happen in soccer or just playing sport like that where you do get injured and it prevents you from doing other exercise? Because I think a concern I had when I was playing soccer in high school and when it started getting more aggressive toward the end of middle school, where I was realizing if I'm playing soccer with all these other guys and we're like, all we need to be rough, we have to play hard, and you can't really be competitive in a game if you don't put your full effort in. I realized I just think my body is really prone to just getting injured. I don't know particularly why. I just think freshman year playing soccer, I felt like I got injured a bunch, and club soccer as well. My friend that I grew up with, we're both the same height, but he's 150 pounds and I'm like 120 pounds. And I was like, maybe I'm not meant to play soccer considering that I'll get injured guaranteed every 2 months. Is there any way where you feel like there's hesitations to play like a sport like soccer, or does everyone not go too hard on each other?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So I think that you could, if we just back up even further from soccer or just sports in general, like thinking about the longevity and health span conversations that like people are having, like Huberman or Peter Attia and stuff. I think it's a risk worth taking to find the exercise you enjoy. That's where I'll start. I think for me, I found it as soccer, and I do have experienced some injuries here and there, delay. The front end, I recognize that, so I want to make sure that I'm fit, so I stay fit throughout the week so I can perform better on Saturdays. But I also recognize, hey, if I keep rolling my ankle or spraining my knee, then this is not maybe a lifelong sport anymore. So I got to take care of that. Or in your situation, if you're trying to compete and you just keep getting beat up, you got to figure that out, right? So I think finding that just right moment, I've tried to balance it in soccer, but told you I've got a knee injury right now. I'm trying to nurse it so I can get back on the field because that's really important to me. But what if my knee doesn't get better? Then I got to find something different, like maybe it's golf or trail running or take up swimming or cycling. But I do think like a sport like soccer, it's a physical game and there's risks inherent to all things. But you look at some of the best players, like the best player in the world right now is one of the smallest players. So Messi's had injuries for sure, but he's also performed at the highest level. So how does that work? As an athletic trainer, watching our high school athletics, I've seen people just so passionate, and then like game can get taken away from sports. And I think that's the unfortunate part of life, is so many unknowns. Certainly there's a risk, but certainly it's a worthy endeavor to pursue. But if you keep running into a wall, like you got to stop doing that and change the patterns and just find something that does work. I do think that in the men's leagues, these guys maybe they're stressed after a long day of work, and so they come out to the soccer field and overly physical sometimes. I've seen that before. I think the group that I play with on Saturdays, we found that balance where we compete, we work hard. Sometimes there's times where people blow up, but overall it's pretty balanced. It is physical, but I've found a way to manage that piece of it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another component that I want to ask you about is when it comes to being an athletic trainer and helping us as high schoolers in your job lead more healthy lives and develop better habits. I was wondering what got you into Parker and how did you decide to choose to come here, take on this job?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So when I went to college, I discovered this major called kinesiology, which is study of human movement. And there was two emphases. You could have a coaching emphasis or you could have a sports medicine emphasis. And so I was intrigued by science and kind of puzzles and trying to help people. And so I went with a sports medicine emphasis. So I graduated college. Fast forward, I took my licensing for becoming a national athletic trainer certification, basically is the test I sat for. And then I thought I wanted to work in the high school setting. And so I emailed my resume to all sorts of schools, and Parker was interested. At that time, there's a physical therapy job as well. So I was hand in hand as a PT clinic in the morning and here in the afternoons. And that was 20 years ago. It was wild. And it was a good place to start. There's people who had been here a long time. The programs were good. People were good. And then another benefit is my kids were going to school here too. So I think that really kept me here and anchored me here. And I developed relationships to stay. So long story short, I love being around sports. So that was a draw. I loved helping people. I loved solving puzzles. And I think like you have your own unique hip injury and Nikki and Kevin are working with you for that. I think that's a puzzle that's worth solving. Like how can we help Ryan get back on the field? And really being a special part of a team as the athletic trainer. Hey, we want to help these athletes get back on the field to help the team and help. So I think those were all the draws for me as an athletic trainer. I'm no longer working as an athletic trainer. I've spread thin across all the sports and I really wanted to connect on deeper levels with a specific group. So I just started working with the soccer team and now the soccer and the golf teams.
So when you started off as an athletic trainer, were you doing what Kevin and Nikki are doing right now with helping people do physical therapy type of work?
Yeah. So it was just me at the time. And then I think in my 8th year, I was able to hire Nikki on a part-time at the time to be an assistant athletic trainer. So we finally had 2 athletic trainers working together, which is really special. Parker's unique in the having 2 athletic trainers. Yeah. And now they have 2 full-time athletic trainers, which is really awesome.
Do you know what Nikki and Kevin do? I usually just see them in the afternoon. Do you know what they do during the morning time?
Yeah, I believe one of them comes in around lunchtime in case somebody has an injury that they can do check in and get some work. One of them's available during the middle of the day. We have our middle school classes too, so they try to be here for those. And then there's a lot of long nights and long weeks, so they work more of a swing shift where they're here middle of the day to late nights and rather than from the morning to the afternoon.
Yeah. I guess I also wanted to touch on Andrew Newberg. Like when I listened to that podcast, I think the message I got from it, I don't know if you remember listening to every part that you listened to, but the part where he was explaining there's a beauty in just uncertainty when it comes to figuring out what you believe in. And being able to just dwell in the sense of uncertainty and not knowing what is going on and almost like accepting that. It was a little abstract, but when it came down to him explaining like the frontal lobe is, I don't know if it was turned on or turned off during those moments of like deep meditation or like deep like oneness with the world. And it almost seems like our brain dictates, depending on which parts are turned on or turned off, how we feel about the world. And they were talking about this toward the end, but this can be an example of why Christianity or any other religion is simplified down to just how our brain decides to turn on or turn off in certain parts or feel different ways or secrete different hormones. Or it could be just an example of God working through us. Have you had the experience of just thinking, how can I change my brain and how I respond to it to hone my life? Or do you think that changes the way you look at Christianity and believing in God?
Yeah, you got a good memory. You drew out some good things from that podcast and inspired me to re-listen. So you talked about a few things. The first one with certainty. And then that last part is just the awareness of how our brain works and just that meta process, whether it's faith or anything. So I think that certainty, I think we all want to avoid fear if possible. And I think if we're certain about something, maybe it makes us feel more comfortable, even though it can be oversimplistic, right? So that mystery or awe or wonder, I think might be what he was talking about, is when we can find our brain can pause that fear avoidance certainty, right? So I'm just going to jump in this group and we know this to be certain, whether we really do or not, and just sit in this more ambiguous space of awe and wonder. Do you think that's what he's getting at, perhaps?
I think so.
I think if we were talking about Christianity, I think about how Christ speaks in parables. And so it's not a black and white, do this, do that. It's a storytelling that draws us in, that causes us to think and reflect and pursue. I think that's what he's getting at when our brain's at its best, when we're really like appreciating the other person across the room rather than putting them in a box. So I think that's where there's beauty in Christianity and like the teachings of Christ. As far as my own mental awareness of that, I often get overly cynical, overly judgmental, and I recognize that's not a healthy place to be. So I think when I am aware of that and I can pause and focus on what am I grateful for, or what are the good things going on, or what can I learn from Ryan today? Where can I learn from the person across from me? That's when I find my brain's at its best state. I hadn't thought about that after I listened to that podcast, but I do when I'm wise enough, and this is rare, to get out of that cynical, judgmental role and just really focus on like things I'm grateful for and the beauty in the world and the beauty in the other person. I think that's when I'm at my best. So I think that's where spiritual teachings have a lot of wisdom for us.
Yeah.
Did I answer that question?
It does answer that question. I think it's hard to answer that question because it's a little bit abstract and it seems almost too simple. It's something I feel like I would know before I listened to the podcast, and the podcast just brought it up and it makes me consider it. And when I'm considering it, that's when I'm like, I think it's making a change on like how I'm feeling about the world, where, like you said, focusing on how I can appreciate the other people around me and focusing on like the gratitude of that instead of the negative aspects of just things that come up in my brain. And that brings me to another question I want to ask you, which is something that like, I've heard about it is how like psychedelic drugs can change your brain. And the reason why I'm like very curious about it now, after hearing the podcast as well, is because I remember like in middle school, a friend came over to my house. Like he lives in Beep now, and he came over for a couple months just to live with us. And he's 2 years older than me. He's like a very thoughtful person, and he's like EQ is like incredible. Like he never got into an argument with any of us, and it was like just calming to be with him. But he told me one day how he was in high school and his friends and him like did LSD together, and he didn't. I guess he said it to brag to me almost, but it was also like a very interesting way he described the experience of feeling the drugs and the effect it had on him and what he was thinking at the time. He said that after he took the drugs and he was sitting with his friends, schoolmates in their room, their school is multiple levels, so they were just watching the city line at night. And then he basically imagined the end of the world for him, where it was like there's a tower and there was a dragon crawling around it. And he said he'd never felt anything like that before. He was completely relaxed. And he felt like he'd found the meaning of life just having the drug go through him and just sitting there and reflecting and being in that state of mood. And he saw things. All I remember is he was describing some pretty crazy things. Like, I don't know the specifics. I just remember the dragon was going around this big, like, building, he was saying. And it just somehow meant that was like what life means to him. And then Mr. D'Onofrio brought it up in high school, and he's I don't know if you know this about Mr. D'Onofrio, but he's planning to take a bunch of those types of drugs when he turns 80, and his body like doesn't really matter if he drugs like do anything bad to him. Like, he's had all the experiences. He now just wants to. He doesn't want to like mess up his brain right now. And I was curious what do you think? What do you think about taking those types of drugs? What do you consider that?
Challenging, deep question, Ryan. I'm not ultra familiar with psychedelics. I do know there's a lot more research, especially with microdoses. I think there's really small doses of psychedelics that being used for things like mental health treatment and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I do think there's lots of dangers. It's really interesting to hear about
Beep.
his experience. I'm glad he was safe and those types of things. I think it goes back to your question of certainty a little bit, right? Like right now, I'd be fearful because you don't know what's going to happen when you take these drugs. So in some ways, that certainty for me is like, really fearful. There's obviously something going on, right? People have these maybe beautiful experiences. I know some people have had really negative experiences. So it's just like a rolling of the dice, it seems, with taking those drugs of knowing. But I do think to disconnect from that certainty, like we talked about earlier, is probably what you're doing. And the hallucinations, it's hard to really, talk about it without first experiencing that, and second, not really knowing. But I think going back to that spiritual life, like the word religion, I understand it to be like come from, I think it's a Latin word, ligamentos, and to reconnect ligaments. We want to be reconnected. And I think in those hallucinal experiences, those spiritual experiences, we're connecting with the world in a different way. So, yeah, it's trippy, no pun intended, to think about those. But I guess I don't have enough information or knowledge to be aware of it. But like you're talking about our English teacher who's considering doing something there, like he has this desire to connect to the world in a different way. I think that's the big pursuit. That's the big curiosity I think we have, is how can we connect to the world on a deeper level?
Dax has also talked about how during fact checks, he often says, it's like Monica, that she should take shrooms. And I think she has a similar reaction to what I think I initially have to taking these types of drugs. But there's a lot of intelligent people, and Mr. D'Onofrio as well, who say that it's something that is worth doing once in a life that we're living here.
I would be lying if I said I'm not intrigued, but I am the youngest of a handful of cousins on my mom's side of the family, and a lot of them have experimented with drugs and went down a dark road. And so that's what prevents me from dabbling or testing. Even as a young person, I was the youngest of these cousins. Some of them were in jail and some of them had these addictions. I know I had a cousin who was experimenting with hallucinogenics and it triggered his schizophrenia, and now he's been struggling with schizophrenia for all of his life. And so that's a button or a trigger, a door, or a room that I don't really want to go inside of. So I'm fearful in that way, to be honest. But I also recognize that it's being used in some healthy ways too. So I'm real curious about that.
I guess I would update you a little bit on how I've been feeling in terms of religion. I think last time we talked, the past couple of times we've talked, I told you about how I've been feeling disillusioned with Christianity and how the physical factors of my injury and my life have made it all seem easier to believe that God, even if he exists, doesn't seem to play that much of a role in my life. Believing that Christianity is hard to grasp onto as a story. But recently, I I've been feeling like I tried to reconnect with God in terms of religion and being able to go to church and trying to worship, or I haven't really been forcing it, but I have been trying to just figure out how I can enjoy life a little bit more. And Kyber actually gave me a piece of advice I thought was really helpful. It was really simple. We went to go watch a theater show, Antigone together, to Kira, and like, we were just watching the show, and he said, I was talking to him about how I feel a little bit like life seems hard to live because it seems purposeless. And he said, I just try to enjoy the little things. He told me that those leaves in the show that they had put up as a prop, they put months of hard work going into this play, and they really care about this working together and making this play, even though we might not care about it as much, but able to just figure out and find those little things to enjoy. And I don't think it clicked with me. I didn't think it was like too insightful at the time. But right now, I'd say with past couple of weeks and just exercising and eating and doing homework and living life, I feel like I've come to a point where I'm a little bit dismayed that I don't have a very clear way of following the religion that Christianity has given me in the past, but I'm enjoying just being able to focus on improving my health, like enjoying my parents, like when we're talking, like enjoying just listening in class and those little things. I'm not really sure what I'm believing in to guide my life, but just enjoying almost like in an atheist perspective, just like enjoying life. And that means like friendships and health and things like that. Yeah, I would say that's like an update
Yeah.
on my life.
Thanks for sharing that, Ryan. Just that,
Yeah.
like, really enjoy those simple things. I might have shared this quote with you before. I think it's Oliver Wendell Holmes. For the simplicity on this side of foolishness, I wouldn't give a fig, like the simple foolishness, but the simplicity on the other side, like this simple wisdom, he'd give his whole life. And I think that's, to me, where Christ is. We're designed for community and connection and to appreciate beauty. And you talked about really appreciating your exercise or your nutrition or your time with family. I think that's where you can experience the goodness of life. And so you don't have to put a name to that necessarily. And there's different seasons, right? We talked about
Yeah.
order and disorder and reorder. We just celebrated the Easter season, right? You got life, you got death, then you get this new life. And so I think that's the patterns of Christ for me too. And not to sell you on anything, but I just think that it's okay to be in a season of unknowing. But I think on the other side of it is like there's some new wisdom from Kyber and the lease and on the set in Antigone. Somebody put a lot of hard work into this beautiful piece of art, and to appreciate that is finding goodness in the world. And I think that's what we're designed for.
Yeah. I think we may need to wrap it up.
All right. Thanks for your time this morning, Ryan. You get me out of my comfort zone too. I've never done a podcast before. I don't think I've ever spoken to a microphone this long either.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
This podcast is with you and York and Kellen. It's actually been really fun. It's just like fun to have conversations like this.
Yeah, no, I look forward to more conversations with you, Ryan.
Okay. I'll let you know once it releases onto Spotify or any of like platforms.
All right.
And you can take a listen.
Thank you, Ryan.